Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming at you. This is a special early edition here at Film Fanatic headquarters. So I want to thank everybody for the continued support and keeping this channel alive, and also with you know the last well especially the last 2 weeks or so, I've been getting lots of new subscribers. So it's been really cool. I've been really diving into a bunch of movies that I've been wanting to get to, but there's been a whole bunch of other things that I've been doing also at the same time around the channel. And one of the things that I had mentioned before in one of my previous videos, like a lot of the times I have to be pretty conscious of which videos I'm doing. It's very easy for me to lose track and to lose focus on what movies I've done, because I love doing this channel a lot. I have to keep track of certain videos, making sure I'm not like repeating myself with actually doing two reviews of the same movie. And that's usually due. It's mostly due to my enthusiasm for this video, and for this channel, for doing these videos for this channel. So like I said, I get overly enthusiastic. So there's so many movies I want to get to, but there's been a whole bunch of movies in particular that I've been wanting to get to, and I keep getting distracted on doing this or that. So I'm trying to, and usually when I do these shows, I don't usually have a distinct plan. When I used to do the Film Fanatic Facebook live videos, when I was first doing live videos, and I was doing going live on Facebook and then sharing them and all those things, I noticed it was really helping the channel, and it was a very new thing for me. And I did that about a little over a year ago. So, and I was kind of reluctant to do that because I've never felt super comfortable speaking in public. But I've learned that it's a good skill set to kind of develop. But then I noticed it really started helping the channel, and it became a really fun outlet for me. And I like to, kind of always push myself a lot. I like to always, I like the challenge of things too. Like particularly if they're in music, I love the challenges around things. I love the, challenges, because one of my weakest areas is around technology. So I like having to tackle some of those things to kind of develop a skill set, even though I have a problem with trying to have more patience around things. But it's a good skill set to learn. One of the things too, like about around, as far as like the idea of like pushing myself a little bit, taking myself trying to always take myself a little bit out of my comfort zone, I feel is always good. I've always had a hard time being complacent on a lot of things. One example too is, which is kind of related to this, but I teach a little bit privately. I give drum lessons, and I just recently started moving into an area with a student of mine who wants to work on a lot of reading applications, and around snare drum and drum set stuff. And reading has always been a really big challenge of mine. I have a pretty decent understanding of very basics, but he's wanting to kind of pursue it more, and that's challenging me now to kind of go into that and to refresh my memory, but then to also learn. And I always love that line, that fine line between like the relationship between like a student and a teacher, because the kid that I'm teaching, obviously I have a lot more experience than him, and I've been, doing it a lot longer, and he's only been playing for a few years, and he just recently started playing shows. He's challenging me to kind of, up my skill set in that department, and that's something I know I need to do. It's something I haven't focused a lot on, and I know it in the big scheme of things, that's really beneficial to acquire that and to really dive into that. So that's one of the coolest things that I love about that is I'm getting a lot out of that situation. Also, I feel like I'm kind of being taught also. So that line, I always get interested by that, by that line, and I've seen it happen a lot for myself where it raises those issues, and so I get a lot out of it. I get challenged, and that's really good because I can never really, you never stop learning, so it always kind of reemphasizes that point. So, and then with the Film Fanatic thing and doing these YouTube channel videos, it's kind of the same thing. I have all of these, other ideas. I've had a lot of ideas since I've been doing a YouTube channel, and I'm, constantly thinking of new things that I can do and trying different formats. And so that pushes me, a little bit out of my comfort zone. So I need to like kind of focus on those things to kind of develop a little bit of a basic skill set around them. So that's that's what I love about the arts the arts in general, especially if you're attempting to express yourself in a few different mediums. That's the coolest thing. So that's why I do it, and that's really at the end of the day, my probably biggest motivation to do these things. So, and before I get into this movie, which is a movie I've been really, again, it's a movie that I've been really wanting to do, and it's a movie by Lucio Fulci, who is my favorite, one of my all-time favorite exploitation directors. I've done a few of his movies. I did a show quite a while ago on the New York Ripper, which to me is just an epic movie. It's one of the sleaziest slasher movies ever made, directed by Lucio Fulci. I love that movie to death. I love all of his films. And then I also did a show shortly after that, again a while back, on probably my favorite Lucio Fulci movie, The Last House, or The House by the Cemetery. That's my, I mean, he's got so many great films. Uh, it's kind of hard to pick your favorite, but or it's kind of hard for me to pick my favorite in his genre, and his like huge catalog of films that he's done. But The House by the Cemetery is probably my favorite. That's the movie. Well, also along the whole like nostalgic thing, that's a movie I grew up watching as a kid, and when I got that last year or the year before, I got it on Blu-ray. It was actually last year. Just brought back so many great memories, and watching it now, I just feel like it, is testimony to how much of a genius he was. I think now that movie, even though it's got the obvious connection for me for like nostalgic reasons, and it's dated in a lot of ways, it it has more when I watch it now, especially the Blu-ray edition that I got, it has even more resonance for me, and I love it even more. And I've watched it a whole bunch of times. And then another film of his that I did, which is another one of my favorites of Lucio Fulci, and this was also a movie I saw. Really, all three of these films I remember seeing a lot as a kid, and so I was very very much attracted to Italian cinema at a really young age, or at least I got turned on to it. I had seen a lot of the Lucio Fulci movies right around the same time that I had seen. It was right at the time I first kind of got exposed to horror films, and also it was at a young age, so it just left a deep mark, and it made me a fan at a young age. But it was right around the time that I first saw the Evil Dead movies, particularly the first Evil Dead by Sam Raimi. It was right around the time, even when I first got exposed to the Friday the 13th franchise, which is my favorite horror franchise. You know, just a magical time. And other movies like The Car, The Tourist Trap. All those movies were just an integral part of my introduction to horror. And so last year also I had bought The Gates of Hell on Blu-ray, and it's just such uh, an amazing movie. It's probably one of my favorite zombie movies ever made, but I just think it's such a classic gothic bloodfest. It's just so good. And the editions that I got of those films on Blu-ray is just they're all just spectacular. And I have a handful of other films of his that I'll be getting to, and I'm also trying to acquire more and more. A huge catalog of films to choose from. So this is a film that came out in 1984, and this is a movie by Lucio Fulci that I don't really hear talked about, which I'm surprised. But Lucio Fulci, I mean, he's mostly well known as a horror director. He's definitely he's my favorite. I've mentioned it before, but there were so many great Italian directors in the 70s, 80s, late 60s, but particularly in the 70s and 80s that just released, I think classic after classic in the world of horror exploitation. So many great directors. But Lucio Fulci is probably my favorite. He's the guy I've seen his films the most. I always kind of gravitate towards them whenever I'm in the mood for a kind of a sleazy horror film that's like super low budget and just gritty and just kind of nasty. I'll I'll always throw in a Lucio Fulci movie. He's kind of my go-to guy. Just very satisfying. Case in point, The New York Ripper. Just a very satisfying movie, even though it's like really disturbing on a lot of levels. It's just, I don't know. It's just so great. There's always a high level of grit to his films, and so he's my man as far as Italian directors. And I always talk about, or it comes up a lot whenever I've seen some interviews or various YouTube guys who talk about horror. Sometimes, well, on two, it's usually on two fronts, but on some fronts, I'm like guys that are like horror fans, and ladies that are out there that do that have YouTube channels that are all like focused on horror. On one hand, a lot of people do bring up his name as being one of the greatest, horror directors, and also he was doing, a lot of these horror exploitation movies, with all of the copious amounts of violence and gore, and just, kind of a master of practical effects. He was doing all of these kinds of movies way before a lot of other American directors. He was a real pioneer. But so Lucio Fulci is mostly well known for being a horror director, but he also did many other styles of films. He did like giallo films. He did westerns. He did science fiction movies. Um, he did kind of pure action exploitation movies. He's made a ton of non horror films. But he's most well known for his horror work. That particular genre really put him on the map as a force to be reckoned with. Probably his most popular movies is the Gates of Hell trilogy. He did like a trilogy, and those three films were the Gates of Hell being the first one, and then the Beyond, being the second. And then the third one in the trilogy was The House by the Cemetery. And it's like a complete trilogy. It's a real interesting mini franchise, if you will. It's and I'm not aware of any other films that he did where they're all so interconnected, but they're just amazing films. I don't have the Beyond on Blu-ray. I need to get that. I haven't been able to find it for some reason, but that's something I need to see. I did see it many, many, many years ago. That was also another film I used to see a lot. Back in the day of VHS, and when a lot of horror films were, back were on cable for a while, in various forms of syndication. So getting back to people who talk about Lucio Fulci, on one hand, I notice there's a lot of hardcore fans that are that might have various YouTube channels. They do talk about him, but then I'm also probably more surprised of the people that really don't mention his name, and I'm really surprised. There's a few people that I watch that are pretty focused on newer things, but newer horror films, but they do have a pretty big, wide variety of films. And they do, a few of them in particular really do cover a lot of the old school horror films, like in the 80s, but they seem to be more focused on the American horror films, not all of the, amazing Italian stuff that was coming out. That I'm always really, really surprised because I always feel like, uh, you know, I don't know, it's a funny thing. And again, it doesn't, I've talked about this before, but it's not a thing of where it might not be your cup of tea because the whole horror exploitation thing is it's kind of its own genre. It's got a very specific kind of style, and I realize it's not for everyone. But what those directors were doing at that time in the 70s, 80s, and even the 60s was way ahead of their time, and they were, pioneers. And I do feel like they really helped shape American horror, by, in many ways, by leaps and bounds, really innovative. And I feel like, those guys, and particularly Lucio Fulci, they need to get the props. And I don't know, I kind of make the analogy of like saying if someone says they're like, a fan of, say, funk music, and, they name a bunch of different bands or artists in that period, like say from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and maybe even some more relatively more contemporary artists that are kind of known in that style, but then they leave out people like say James Brown, for instance, and they don't really talk about him. Um, and when you dive into his work, you realize how innovative he was and how ahead of his time, and he helped to shape everything in really everything related to dance music, including even electronic music to hip hop. So even if, like, say, for instance, which I don't know how that would be possible, but even for instance, like you might not like his style for whatever reason, but you are saying or claiming that you're a fan of like funk music, but you don't even acknowledge James Brown. It doesn't really make sense to me, and at least in my world, because he's the godfather of so much of that music. And I look at Lucio Fulci being I look at the scenario or that situation with Lucio Fulci, what he was to horror as being like the same kind of thing. Just an integral part of the whole culture around horror and the whole genre, and all of the you know thousands and thousands of films that have come out since that period. So But this is one of his non-horror films. I have a few of his films that are not like quote unquote the his non horror genre films. And this is a movie I've never really heard. I had never heard about before. I don't really hear it talked about very often. And this is one of his sci-fi movies. It came out in 1984, and that's Warriors of the year 2072. And I bought this on Blu-ray. Uh, One of the awesome things about a lot of these packages, and this is by Severn. Severn is one of my favorite companies. I've talked a lot about Severn in the past, but they do such an amazing job with these Blu-rays. Like it's astounding how great they are. They always pack them with like an amazing amount of special features. And the other thing that's really awesome is they always come. A lot of the times they come with soundtracks for a lot of these films, and this movie in particular came with a with the soundtrack for this movie, Warriors of the year 2072, and it is so awesome. This is like definitely a favorite of mine. I never saw this film before. There's quite Lucio Fulci's catalog of films is really massive. There's quite a few of his films I have never seen before, but those basic ones that I talked about in the beginning of the show, those are the ones I kind of grew up on, and I always knew who he was. And then as I got older, I put two and two together, and since I've been buying a lot of his movies and really kind of checking out his stuff, I've discovered so many of his films that I haven't seen, and this was one of them. And this is such an epic kind of modern like dystopian gladiator film. It's really really awesome. It's super cheesy. The music is just the soundtrack is just incredible. It's really sleazy. Some of the violence is really over the top. One of the things too, one of the aspects that I love about Italian horror is I feel like the classic Italian directors, Bruno Mattei, Dario Gento, so many great directors. They all had an incredible knack for whenever they made a film uh, to like always create this atmosphere where you every time I watch one of those classic films or one of these classic films, it feels like you're transported to that particular universe. Everything just feels real. It just has this real like kind of tangible thing. It's tactile, but they just all these great classic Italian exploitation movies have such amazing atmosphere, and everything you're seeing on the screen is all like practical effects. And this movie is like the epitome of that. Like the whole futuristic vibe that's created on the big screen is just amazing. And so it was all created by all this amazing imagination, and there's all like in camera sets, and they're all miniatures, and it's just so cool. And it's also amazing that how uh, on a, or in or on a lot of levels it doesn't seem dated. Like it, even though I would definitely, out of the films I've seen of Lucio Fulci, um, this is probably the only full on kind of dystopian sci-fi movie I've seen. Most of his films that I have seen, I've seen some of his giallo films, and obviously his horror films. But this is like a straight up sci-fi movie. It definitely has horror elements, but it's this movie probably has the most elaborate kind of set pieces that I've ever seen, especially around the miniatures. It's so cool. It has it very much has a to me like has a Blade Runner feel. Even this came out a few years after Blade Runner, and I imagine this probably had a little bit of an influence on it. Uh, and it's such an epic movie. I mean, it's it's so satisfying, and I've always been surprised that I don't really hear this movie talked about much, even by a few people that I know on that have YouTube channels, and they do lots of coverage of Lucio Fulci movies. I haven't really seen this movie talked about, so when I came across this, I was sold because it just looked amazing. The artwork is just spectacular. And again, the packaging is just really great. There's hours and hours of special features on here. Um, they really go in depth. That's again, I've said it before and I'll say it again. That's one of the things that I love about Severin is, you know, every movie I've been buying a lot of Severin films, and every movie I have bought, they all come with like these elaborate, amazing collections. They're all, packed to the rafters with all kinds of great special features. A lot of them come with the original artwork, sometimes two discs. They come with the original soundtracks. That's the other thing that I love about these films, and particularly the late 70s and 80s. I am such a huge fan of this music that it's just, you know, it's yeah, they're it's basically my favorite period of soundtracks. And particularly, like, I've always talked about my real deep love for electronic music, and this stuff is all like heavy electronica. So, and it was all used with like real primitive keyboards and real primitive technology, but it has this really gritty rawness to it. The House by the Cemetery, that's another movie that I bought. I've just talked about, and that set also comes with the soundtrack, and that's one of my all-time favorite soundtracks of all time, and it's probably my favorite soundtrack of Lucio Fulci, and probably my favorite exploitation soundtrack. Both, but this soundtrack is incredible, and I've listened to it so many times. And this music, all of the aesthetics around films like this is such a huge influence on me as for my band Quantum. Like this kind of thing is probably the biggest influence on that music. So for what it's worth, I know the music that I create and what I try to do with the material. If I wasn't so into this music and into this kind of whole world, and this whole aesthetic, I think the music, for what it's worth, again, you like it or you don't like it, and I know it's not everybody's cup of tea or whatever. It would not be the same. It would not be. It would probably be completely different, or it might not really even exist. Um, you know, like that. This kind of thing here is like definitely the biggest influence on the music I write, and you know, so I owe such an amount of gratitude and props to the work of Lucio Fulci, because it's like basically shapes my world. So just amazing, and this transfer of this film is incredible. Severin is definitely overall, I'd say, the best company in the land. Just amazing. And this transfer is just ridiculous. It's so epic. All remastered, directly. The transfer from the original film to this digital format is just incredible. The soundtrack, all remastered, just amazing. Um, just great. And again, Severin knocks it out of the park all the time because of the amount of love that they put into these packages, with all of the time that they put into putting together these special feature packages. This has like um, at least like, yeah, I'd say over 3 hours of interviews and that go into such detail about all the workings and all the things that made this movie into what it is. But amazing. Yeah, I just love it, and definitely one of my favorites. And again, like I said, I never heard about this movie. I'm a huge fan of like post-apocalyptic films, and that's one of my favorite genres, and so this is like such a great representation of that style and genre. Totally ahead of its time. It's great. So this is Jason Dean. I want to thank everyone for their great support. And if you like this channel, please like and subscribe. And I really appreciate all the love and support. And we will see you next time. Peace.